and then all of a sudden they come together and you're like, it's just like a magic moment.
And we're on. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Last Week Liquid podcast. Today I have the immense pleasure of sitting down with Will, better known as Keeno. Will is a drum and bass producer and DJ, currently signed to Hospital Records with 4 albums under his belt at this stage, the most recent one being I Live, I Learn, which was released a little under a year ago. He is also the host of the Bristol Mix Sessions, a monthly installment, which has now also morphed into a live event. You can catch his latest release, the remix of White Lies by Sultan and Shepherd, out now on all platforms. Will, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hiya, I'm good, thank you, mate. How are you?
Not too bad. Thanks a lot for making some time. I know you're a busy man with all your different ventures, so thanks a lot for that.
Oh, it's all good. It's nice to do something different, and I don't often get the opportunity to do video podcasts, so hello, everyone.
Yeah, I'm not entirely comfortable with the video format yet because I've been doing this show for a year now, but it's been audio only for a long time because I just didn't have time to do the whole video side of things. And luckily now I have a guy who helps me edit the videos and publish it and all of that. So it's still kind of new to me. I'm trying to pay attention to how I not scratch my nose every 5 seconds like I used to before.
Yeah, it can be difficult. I get what you mean on that. I've done 50 podcasts on Facebook and YouTube and stuff now. And I kind of got used to talking in front of a microphone, and it's not something at the beginning I was very comfortable with at all. Constantly tripping over my words, trying to talk too fast.
Yeah.
All these mistakes that people generally make. And also people worry way too much. Ultimately, making mistakes in conversation is natural. So you could just, you can just be normal.
Yeah. I remember the very first episodes I did for this podcast, I used to edit a shit ton, if there were silences that were a bit too long or whatever I felt uncomfortable, I would be editing everything out. And as time went on, I kind of left those blanks in because it just makes for a more natural conversation. Not everything is back and forth.
Not everything's quantized. No.
Yeah, exactly. But
I'm actually doing a lot of that right now, reducing the amount of quantization in my music. And that's just purely by recording things at source instead of using samples.
Yeah. So you just mentioned episode 50 of Bristol Mix Sessions. Congrats on that one.
Thank you.
Been doing it for quite a few years now. How did it feel to reach the 50 mark?
It's kind of surreal, but at the same time, it has felt like I've done 50 episodes. So by the time I got to 4 hours to go, I had a total power cut in my house.
Oh, shit.
And there was so many things that had gone wrong up to that point for this mix session. And that I was like, can I actually do this physically? And then the electrics went wrong. I was like, okay, this is one step too far. But fortunately, having just refurbished the kitchen in our house, I had a really good electrician, and I rang him up and it explained the situation. And it just so happened that someone was driving home and they were quite near to our place. He swung by, fixed the fault, and I was able to go live at 6:30 as scheduled.
Oh, nice.
But it was just one of those things where you've done 49 episodes and something still new happens.
Yeah.
You're like, wow, okay, what else is going to happen?
Yeah. I had the case the other day where, I'm on episode 50 something by this stage, and episode 40 or something, 45, and I recorded my computer mic instead of this one. And you'd think after 40 episodes, you'd know how it works, but you just have to stay focused all the time.
This mic's attached to a vocal processing unit. And if you press a certain button, it turns auto-tune on. And I had auto-tune on for an entire Bristol Mix Sessions episode without realizing until 53 minutes into the mix. And then I realized that my voice sounds a bit robotic. And no one else really noticed.
Nobody told you.
It's just it doesn't quite turn you into Kanye. It kind of just turns your voice into a bit of a quantized monster. And I don't know. I could turn it on right now, actually, but I don't think I don't think I'll remember to turn it back off again, and that'll just be horrendous. I'm not going to touch it. It's working.
Does that mean you're speaking in pitch or
Well, everyone speaks in pitch, but I guess it's just it picks out what intonation is the most common for your voice and just kind of decides that that's the scale of your voice.
Yeah. Good stuff. So yeah, you came off last week as we were speaking. Obviously, this episode will be airing quite a few weeks later, but you're just back from Hospitality in the Woods. How was that event for you? I know it was quite a milestone for a lot of people, like reconnecting and all of that stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I probably saw more than 300 people I knew, and I hadn't seen those people in 18 plus months in some cases, or even longer. And it was really emotional to see them and to actually sit down and have a chat and actually see what kind of person they've become in the last 2 years. Because I know that everyone has changed quite a bit, myself included, and everyone's kind of grown up a bit as well. So it's odd to see like some people who before the pandemic were, you know, renting a place and just playing gigs to like on the side, and now they're doing a musical job full time and they're DJing all the time and they're super busy, and it's really great to like just kind of see where everyone's at and get to listen to all the new music that have been created, and also see who's been practicing and who hasn't been practicing DJing. I could definitely tell there were a few people who were like, I haven't played in front of a few thousand people before
any
in a while.
Names that come to mind?
I'm not going to name any names. That's just, that's mean. I did see Winslow play for the first time.
Yeah.
And that was amazing. Big ups Duncan. I saw Mandy Misleds there, who's a Bristol local. I saw Piper Dilemma at the Solvent stage, and John Galaxy, and saw Will Winey, and all these people that they're just kind of all in the same place at once, and it's really nice.
Yeah. Were there like a lot of people that you maybe might have met only online? Like obviously Winslow would have been one, I guess, but like
Winslow's one. I'm not sure actually. Though I did obviously meet Causa, who was playing before me on the main stage, and she was meant to be playing for our event at the beginning of August, but she unfortunately was poorly for the actual event, so we had to find a replacement for her. And I never actually got to meet her. She never came down to Bristol. So we saw each other for about 2 seconds whilst she was finishing her last mix and I was about to start my first. But, you know, that's the way it goes sometimes.
Still counts.
Yeah. Other than that, mate, it was just nice to be in London for a while. I did a Women in Drum and Bass panel on Friday, the day before Hospitality in the Woods, day one. And gave an hour's production talk there, and that was really fun. And then did a set on the Saturday, a set on the Sunday, and then, you know, held my head in shame on Monday, trying to drive home.
Was that the Sonic Surgery event?
That's it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. How did that go? I didn't speak to anybody after that event went down. How did it go?
Well, actually, we left Bristol at about 11 and then didn't actually get to the event until after 5 p.m. because we had to go first via Bromley to drop off some stuff at the place we were staying and then navigate our way to Central. So we didn't actually have much time at the event, but from what I could tell, people were really having a really good time. And I think they had about 80 people through the door, which is pretty damn good for a panel of about, you know, ultimately quite niche stuff. And I was one of the people to give a talk on production right at the end of the day in one of the studios. And essentially I was going to go with a detailed plan of what to say and what to cover, but it seemed that I would be making an assumption that everyone is at a certain level of production. Yeah. And it would be really good for some people there and less good for others. So I instead reversed the trajectory of the talk and started with questions and therefore gauged where people's kind of focus was at this time. I gave people like subtitles for their questions, so they weren't just like random questions. It'd be like, give me questions about technique and mixdown, and give me questions about creativity, and that kind of helped guide the chat. And everyone kind of got time, I think, to, I don't know, I'd say people got time to about 10, 15 minutes per person, which is really nice.
Yeah.
So they actually got like essentially one-on-one production tips. And
That's pretty good.
most of the time I was talking about more conceptual stuff rather than going through specifics on in Ableton or in Cubase or whatever.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just thoroughly enjoyed it, mate. I probably will do a lot more of that kind of stuff. Just as it's going through my mind in the last couple of months, I would like to make use of the unique set of skills that I've gathered over the years and pass them on to people who are looking to learn how to do X, Y, and Z, or how to learn music from scratch.
Yeah.
And I think if I can, I'll try and get some products and some videos together. But I think I need to time it quite well. If I release this kind of content early without a full understanding of what it's for and why I'm putting that content out, it might just have us peak and kind of just lose its momentum. But what I really would like that to do is to turn it into a community of people who are making similar styles of music and for them to learn from each other.
Okay.
Instead of it just being lots of people paying me to learn from me.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah, more like a kind of Discord community sharing stuff.
Yeah, precisely. But we'll see what kind of options I have available to me. At this stage, my focus is making music and putting on events. So
yeah, I know you did an AMA on Reddit when your album was coming out, and I think you had mentioned there that you had plans for somebody was asking were you going to do any production live streams and stuff like that, and you mentioned that you had something in the works for 2021 in terms of teaching and doing that, and but 2021's running out now, so
yeah, exactly. The only unfortunate thing is that there's so many products out there that you can learn from. And in order to stand out from those things, you really need to focus on what's unique to you and why people want to learn from you. And I'm not very good at that kind of self-analysis. I know people that are good at that. And they're coming to me shortly in a couple of weeks, and we're going to sit down and be like, okay, this is what I know you're good at and what people want to learn from you. So let's just make short videos about this.
Yeah.
And the intention is to release a kind of taster course so that people can pay for a short video, probably be an hour in total. And if they like the kind of teaching style and the kind of content that I cover, then they can apply for one-on-one production sessions, essentially. And this will kind of avoid that unnecessary hour-long Zoom chat when you're just chatting and you need to know each other. If you've already been through an hour's production talk from me, you know what kind of approach I'm going to do, and then we can just start and act as normal humans instead of having to go through this kind of rapport. So I mean, I'm thinking about it quite carefully, and I'm trying not to get too overwhelmed by it. I'm just going to let it happen in its own time. And I think when it does get to publishing that kind of content, it will be in line with a release, or it'll be in line with some other content that's been released, rather than just being a solo thing. Because then it's nice to kind of wrap those two things together and people kind of make new connections. And it crosses the platforms as well. That's something I'm learning about at the moment. It's like, if you want to be good on YouTube, you need to be also good on other places and do all this.
And Facebook and all
so
that.
So it's a lot to think about.
But probably with the Hospital obviously launched the Hub recently, which is kind of this Patreon-like platform for exclusive content. So maybe that's like one place where it could live. That seems quite obvious. But I don't know. Maybe you want to do something standalone, like maybe not be attached to Hospital all the time. I don't know how you're thinking about it, but that could be an option. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's something I've been offered to do, is work on the Hospital Hub. But at this point in time, I'm still working on sketching out album 5, and any extra time that I have aside from writing music, I'm helping Liv run events. So it's kind of, when I've got a nice big pot of tunes that I feel happy with, I'll be like, right, now let's focus on that. But I think for the time being, I'm just enjoying being engrossed by creating new content and new music.
Yeah. Do you ever stop writing music? Because I feel like every album you release, you just like start straight, you continue straight into it from what I've read in interviews. And I've never seen you say like, oh yeah, I had to take like 6 months off because I was like sick of music after putting out this album, which I've seen a lot of other artists like mention and talk about.
It's quite confusing in timeline, I guess. I think when you, the consumer, see the release date of an album, the reality is I finished that music probably over a year ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm quite detached in time from that music. And yes, I'm always creating new music. But the other thing you have to consider is that even if I finished that bunch of tunes a year ago, a year before that, so 2 years before the release date, there was a choice. Okay, we're going to work on this bunch of tunes instead of this bunch of tunes.
Yeah.
So now I've done 4 album cycles of that, and every album cycle you have 25 tunes. So I've got 12 that got released and 12 that didn't. So for every 4 albums, I've got another 4 albums of unreleased material.
And I'm struggling to put an EP together here, but yeah, it's fine.
It's one of those things that I've just grown up with, to be honest, mate, is just constantly writing and constantly expressing myself in that way. It's a really therapeutic thing for me, and I'm not making music to make money. I'm making music to satisfy my creative desires and satisfy my emotional like craving to make music. And the byproduct of that is albums and
a shit ton of tunes.
Everything else. Yeah.
How was your, like I mentioned I Live, I Learn came out like, slightly less than a year ago. How was that experience compared to previous albums? Obviously the context was quite unique and all of that, but how do you look back on that experience releasing that album in the times we were in?
It's quite bizarre, to be honest. It doesn't really feel like the album ever was, like it was released. Obviously people have copies of it and it was digitally available and it's been streaming, but it happened all online. So it doesn't quite feel real in that way. I didn't go to Hospital HQ and sign loads of copies. I didn't meet loads of people at parties across the world and be, presented with a copy of their album on CD or whatever it is and a marker pen and say, can you please sign it? That none of that happens, which is what I associate with album campaigns. And everything kind of had to be done in a different way as well, because people's finances were strained in a different way to what they usually are. People's viewing habits changed, listening habits changed, like the way that music fitted into people's lives completely changed as well, especially dance music when you couldn't dance. So I was lucky enough, well, I am fortunate enough to write music that's both suitable for a dance floor and for home listening or wherever you are. It's not just intended to be on the dance floor, but then playing those tunes that I wrote and finished in lockdown out at Hospitality in the Woods and hearing them like properly loud in front of the audience that essentially it was written for was quite crazy. And that definitely made it feel more tangible to me. And now I've got memories in real life and memories of online events to tie to this album. So I think I'll look back on I Live, I Learn in about 4 years and realize it was really important that I did release that album at that time and didn't delay it until parties happened. Because I think a lot of the audience that and I've been told this, a lot of the audience that is at the core of my fan base needed that content at that time, and appreciated the opportunity to really sit down and listen to something that I've clearly taken a lot of care about creating.
I think also like the listening experience must have been very different from previous albums for people, because they were stuck at home and maybe they might have like paid more attention or read more into the like lyrics or whatever, just because everybody had so much time and stuff. I don't know if you've noticed like the feedback from people as the album came out, like if it was different to previous albums because of that.
Interesting. I had a Bandcamp online album live stream on the actual day of the album release, and I think I was the first drum and bass artist ever to live stream on Bandcamp.
Okay.
And it was quite a big deal, and you could like feature products at the bottom of your screen and like feature your latest album, and then if someone buys that album whilst the stream is going live, it notifies the whole audience, and everyone goes nuts. And obviously I'm exactly here where I am stood right now, and I'm mixing tunes, and the only proviso is I can only play Keeno tunes. I can't play music from anyone else because there's no licensing in place. And it was kind of bizarre knowing that there were 300 people across the world all going nuts in their own living rooms or own bedrooms, and they're all listening on different sound systems or different pairs of headphones, but it's the same tune. And I kind of liked that something unique happened and a unique experience was created, especially for that core audience. So that they feel like included in that journey and included in the part of that my development as an artist. And it definitely feels odd to know that a bunch of people heard this for the first time on Spotify instead of in the club, for example. Or heard it on the radio and then found it on Spotify and went from there. It's just kind of a bizarre time. It was a bizarre time, and bizarre things happen. So
it's a bit of almost like a once in a, if you want to obviously see the bright side and all of that, like once in a lifetime opportunity, like, because like going forward, like people will probably always hear albums or like tunes live first, because that's how it's always been. And then you had this one moment in time where people got to experience music in a different way. So in that sense, I think there's a lot of like learnings, and I know I've listened to a lot of albums very differently because I was just singing at home with headphones and kind of paying attention in a different manner. So a bit of silver lining there, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And you also, having finished the tunes in a pre-master sense in lockdown and then sent them off to the vinyl pressing house, etc., I noticed that I was a lot more finicky about the final product. And I think that's because I knew that people would be listening primarily on headphones and primarily
dissecting tunes.
Exactly. And I was like, it has to be right. It has to sound right. It can't just be thrown together. And that was a challenge. But ultimately, I think I just kind of bounce things to audio and stop messing about.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because if you're playing your dubs live, they can be a bit rough. But if you get a good reaction from the crowd, it's like, that's like pretty much done. Whereas here, you don't have that feedback and that check with the audience. So it's kind of like, okay, this can actually be better. This can be better. This can be better.
Yeah, I had that exact moment at Hospitality in the Woods. I dropped a new tune, which had a really amazing reaction on the drop itself. But the introduction was just like almost like there wasn't an intro. Almost like the intro was just 4 bars.
Okay.
And people were just like, so, but then if you listen on headphones, it's really engaging.
Okay, yeah. It just
because it was outside and there was loads of chatter, and like basically the intro is that it's kind of just like being outside with loads of chatter, and it's like, where's the tune?
Yeah.
So I've learned now that I need something that people can fix onto.
Yeah.
And then let that kind of chaos evolve. But Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, that's funny. Is there like one or like different like learnings you took from that whole process, that album release, or even like just writing the album that you're taking into this new album that you're writing now? Like stuff you learned and you're like, oh yeah, I need to remember this for this new album.
Yes, definitely. And most of them are quite boring, matter-of-fact things, really. And the first thing is bouncing stems for finished tunes.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is properly naming, organizing, and filing those stems so that they are accessible at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
And the third thing really is making sure I do exactly what I feel is best at the time, rather than trying to. When I was finishing I Live, I Learn, I tried to think ahead of time and be like, okay, well, where will this music sit if we go back to clubs? Would it still be relevant?
Yeah.
And it made me worry about whether the tunes I was putting on that album will be, listened to after this kind of bubble moment.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, do I need to change some of these out? Do I need to put some other things in there? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? And ultimately, I just trusted my gut feeling, which was I like these tunes.
Yeah.
And they form a nice product together and they complement one another. Mm-hmm. So if I've worked for X amount of months on that basis, I'm probably right.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's what I need to do for this next album. Is I've already got a bunch of tunes coming together, and I'm worried because a lot of them are in G minor.
Okay.
And you can't listen to like 12 tunes in G minor.
Yeah.
But they're all very different.
Okay.
And obviously, like, it's all strings, it's all piano, it's all drums, and it's all bass. Yeah. And it's all in G minor, but they're all completely different. So like, I like that. And I like that if you were listening to those in sequence, it would almost feel like 4 parts to one tune, but almost 4 completely different things anyway.
That's a cool concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah. How come they end up being in G minor? Is that just your natural like position when you're playing piano, or?
I think ultimately it's just where the tunes sat. So you have register, which is the, which octave is this instrument playing in.
Yeah.
And you also have voice leading, which is where are the instruments moving in step or are they moving in leaps? So if you have good voice leading, things move in step and they often feel like they're a melody themselves.
Okay.
However, if they're not well voice led, they'll feel like chordal movements.
Okay. Yeah.
So you have to combine these two things when you're writing for string instruments.
Yeah.
Because you don't want the string player to make awkward hand movements, have to change strings. You don't want them to have to do unnecessary things that will interrupt the flow of the melody. Yeah. So that's easier in G minor, especially with cellos.
Okay.
Because the natural resonances that are on the strings sound super nice in that pitch.
Okay.
And it's the same thing with a violin, because the bottom string is an open G. Okay. And if you're just doing open string, it's like the loudest the instrument can possibly be.
Yeah. The more bass.
The thickest string, there's no finger touching the fretboard, shortening that string.
Yeah.
It's using the full soundboard.
As clean as possible,
Yeah, exactly. And so using those natural phenomenon to your advantage is something that my ear has learned over years and years and years. And then that has led me to, when cycling through which key to choose this song in, I'm like, that one.
Sounds good in G.
Yeah, exactly. G minor and E minor are really good for strings.
Okay. That's a good tip for people. But it just makes me think of like I was thinking back, I had a chat with Muzz a few episodes back, and he obviously had an EP called F Minor Factory, and that was kind of like a joke on all the tracks that are in F minor, because you just have your drop hitting that F note and it sounds good.
Yeah, well, I've got that tune that I was talking about a little while ago on A Hospitality in the Woods with a chaotic intro.
Yeah.
That the whole premise of that track is that low F sub note.
Yeah.
And essentially nothing happens except that low F sub note on the drop.
Okay.
The drums are very, very minimal, and even the kick is super short, but the sub note is just unfeasibly loud, and is bolstered by a bassoon as well, playing the same low note. And like, if you have a bassoon playing extremely loudly, like the reeds in their mouth start they start mimicking the effect that really large function one systems or void systems, that sub flutter you sometimes get where the pressure of the sub is like almost moving the air out of the way of your ear because it's so loud. So when you're listening to the sub note, you're hearing the sub, and when you're not listening to the sub note, you're hearing like the air pressure that's been replaced. So it's like
okay, well, sounds pretty heavy.
Yeah, so that happens with bassoons when they play really low, because they have to force so much air through the reed in order to produce this low note.
Yeah.
And the lower the frequency of the note, the more energy is required to produce it. And so they literally have to fool themselves with a lung full of air and go down this bassoon. And if you take out if you shelf out the low stuff and just use this kind of airy stuff on top of a pure sub note, it sounds absolutely mental. But the whole premise of that track is building up to that moment. And I was almost like, well, it doesn't matter what happens before. I can do absolutely anything as long as it's completely chaotic. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah. You could do like just in terms of chaotic, obviously I'm a huge fan of the Beatles, and I talk about the Beatles like every second episode here, but like they're the A Day in a Life, like the rise of the strings. That's very chaotic.
That's the exact effect I'm trying to mimic. Except I've got a violinist to do lots of extended techniques, and we're gonna just basically experiment and see what happens, because I think there are string sounds going on, and there is also quite a lot of just generally going on in the intro, but it's all quite low volume. And this kind of lead element is required to really draw people into that F moment.
Okay, cool. I'm really keen to hear it. It sounds like an interesting one.
It's called ambient occlusion.
Okay.
For the time being. It might change depending on the album title track. But I'm not sure if you know what ambient occlusion is.
No.
So it's what happens when other objects approach other objects and you see this shadow. So gotcha. Yeah. As you get closer to it, the little shadow underneath my finger is called the ambient occlusion.
Ah, wow. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So essentially, I was like, okay, how can I mimic this in audio? So I just essentially thought about moving my hand towards an object, and when the hand made contact with that object, that was the low F sub note, and anything that happened before was just kind of cloudy and chaotic.
Yeah.
So it's just that.
Well, where do you come up with like all these concepts and like ideas and stuff? Is like reading or movies, documentaries, like
life? Literally, I live, I learn, mate. That's it. My whole existence contributes to where I get my inspiration from. There's no one source and no one reliable source, which is the frustrating thing.
Yeah.
However, I know that I can trust my brain to do what I want it to, as long as I don't force it to do that thing.
Yeah.
And a lot about what I talked in my production talk, the Women in Drum and Bass panel, was, and a lot of what I heard from these women is that they get frustrated with a song and they start twiddling, and then they end up falling out of love with the song, and then when they come back to it, they can't fix it because they don't know why they loved it in the first place, because they've removed that. They've removed all of that soul. And I said to them, if you want to write music and you've got time to write music, but you don't have the mental energy or the desire to sit down and create something from scratch, limit yourself in such a way that it bolsters your creativity later down the line. For example, spend an hour, no more, no less than an hour, making as many separate drum beats as you can.
Okay.
Or make as many 808 low F sub variations as you can and just bounce a load of samples for yourself. Spend 10 minutes doing white noise effects risers and just build yourself a library of sounds that you've created. And during that process, you'll learn how to do that faster and optimize that process the next time you want to do it, in case the sample you've made isn't quite right for when you want to use it.
Yeah.
And arm yourself with the tools to complete your music when you're feeling it. So when you're in that moment and you're like, oh, I need this, oh, I need that, oh, I've got this, oh, I've got that, and it all just comes together, and then you're done and you're finished and you can press export.
Yeah.
Stop fanning around whether, oh, have I got the right hi-hat sample, or have I got the right, it's none of that's important. You should make that choice in the moment and then just trust that choice. And if it's not working, you've either chosen the wrong sample, you've chosen the wrong sound, or you need to put it in a different place. Simple as that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a huge challenge of, like, obviously organizing your library and everything being organized so you can pick and choose very quickly. Because I know I've been in this situation where I've laid down like a chord progression that I'm quite happy with, and then I'm trying to flesh out the drums around it, and I get stuck finding the right loop or the right hats or whatever, and then that kind of inspiration, that motivation kind of disappears. And when it's gone, it's gone. Like, it's there's no like getting it back. Like, once you get frustrated on your drum loop, it's like I can't get out of that mindset. So
yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, that is something that I still do struggle with, definitely. However, you can combat that in two ways: either by always playing to a drum beat, whether that be at drum and bass tempo or not. It doesn't really matter. You can just play at 140 if it's the speed that you can play the progression that you're playing, and then just speed it up after the fact. Or you can just make a load of drums in advance and just drop any old drum kit in and use that as a placeholder, and then decide in that moment, I am going to replace this drum kit in the future.
It's all right.
But I'm not gonna do that now. I'm gonna finish the tune and I'm gonna hate the drums for like a week. But I'm gonna fight that urge. And then after a week, you'll be like, right, I've done everything else, and now I get to work on the drums.
Yeah.
And you'll be like, okay, I've just got to do the drums now. And your brain will be like, okay, we can get this done pretty easily.
Yeah. It's really about like compartmentalizing like your different tasks and different things you need to do. And there's like the inspiration and vibe part of the track, and there's the more technical aspect. And it's not trying to do everything at the same time or in sequence. Like
doing everything all at the same time is a lot to do with it. It's something that I learned from playing in orchestras and playing in bands and being in choirs. Like, you do sectional rehearsals and then you come together as a group and you do everything. So the same thing applies to mix downs.
Yeah, definitely.
You just do sectionals. You do drum sectionals, you do music sectionals, you do bass sectionals, and then bring everything together.
Yeah, definitely. So staying on like orchestra and stuff, classical music. I know you've spoken about it a lot in previous interviews, and you must be sick about telling the story of how you got into music and all of that stuff. But for people who might have like not read your interviews or just being fans of the music, can you just quickly walk me through how you got into music when you were a kid and kind of your path towards drum and bass?
Definitely. So my big brother, Tom, he introduced me really to music as I knew it then, as a toddler. And he literally, as soon as I could hold my head up, he would plonk me in front of the piano on a piano stool on several books. And just put my arms on the piano and just leave me there until I got bored, and then he'd pick me up and do something else with me. But he'd do that every day, I'm told, or at least is when he was home and when he could be bothered. And although I was just literally doing this, at 12 months old, or 18 months old, it was enough for my eyes and my muscles to start learning how to play the piano.
Yeah.
And then I went to school and got lessons. And then I became a choir boy at the age of 9 and did music 24/7. Like, my whole existence was music, because that depended on A, getting a huge discount on school fees, which was important to my parents, and B, it gave me a leg up in school in terms of a social network I could rely on. Immediately put me in a group of friends and gave me access to new experiences, and I got to relationships with teachers that meant that 10 years down the line I could just, ring them up and have a cup of tea and go over and say hello.
Yeah.
And those are the really characteristic defining things that that made Will into who he is. And then around the age of 16, I started experimenting with writing music in Sibelius and Cubase, thanks to an education discount on a Cubase license. And
they always come in handy.
It's £29 for a full license.
Is that still the one you have now? Like, is it?
No. Okay. No, not at all. I think that was Cubase 3.
Oh, jeez.
And yeah, I, at that point, I didn't really know what Cubase was or what it was for. I just knew that you could kind of program stuff. Really, I was more focused on writing music by hand and scoring stuff in Sibelius. And then my music teacher said, you can export MIDI data from Sibelius and then import it into Cubase. And then you can program each of those MIDI datas to be actual violins and actual cellos. And I was like,
that was the mind blown.
And then literally I was like... And then at the age of 16, someone showed me high contrast. And I was like, oh, I can just add drum beats to these. I've made hundreds of these little orchestral projects. I can just add drum beats to them and Bob's your uncle. I've got drum and bass.
Yeah.
And I thought it was drum and bass. And really, it was a drum and bass beat accompanied by orchestral elements. But really, I kind of, at that stage, didn't really care whether it was seen as authentic drum and bass. I just knew that I liked writing it and that I enjoyed the creative process. And then I kind of got to, 18 years old, I think it was, 19 years old. And I started sending music to hospital. And the rest is history, really. I got a really nice relationship with Tony Coleman at London Electricity. When I was 18 years old, he just kind of realized that I knew how to make drum and bass. I knew how to make music in a traditional way. And I just had absolutely no idea what the hell drum and bass scene was all about. And he just, I think at that time, I needed that guidance. So I really appreciate Tony for that. And I really understand, looking back, how important it was to have support, because having to do all of this marketing and all of the management and all of at the age of 18 whilst at university and that just would not have been possible. And I would not be here today doing what I'm doing without that help of a team around me who were just putting stuff behind the scenes together. But I've been a classical musician through and through. I play the clarinet, I play the guitar, I play the piano, I sing. I can teach music, I can live stream your band, I can record DJ sets for you, I can teach you how to produce.
You can do it all.
Yeah, that's me.
I'm curious, like, how, because I started learning the piano quite young for a few years, and then as I turned 16, 17, was kind of like, or even a bit younger, I was like, I want to play electric guitar and get into rock bands and stuff like that. Kind of curious how your journey was, where you, because obviously you switched to electronic music quite young. Did the band route never really appeal to you? Like, just to quote unquote stick to real instruments and play in a live fashion? Huge air quotes for people listening on the audio.
Yeah. So, the electronic thing happened really late, and I first learned how to use Cubase to record bands and record string quartets and orchestras. So whilst I was at school, there was there were concerts and recitals and things going on in our concert hall. And that was constantly mic'd up 24/7. And we had a studio that you could record that source from. And there was a group of 6 of us or 7 of us who learned music production at school. There wasn't like a course or like a lesson time. It's just something that you did in your free time. And the teacher that was there was nice enough to give us an hour of his time, outside of his schedule. And our responsibility was to record every single concert, every single week for the whole year.
Oh, wow.
At school. And I did that for 4 years. So if you imagine my schedule at school, I'm at school, like 35 weeks of the year or whatever. Of those 35 weeks, I would be recording a string quartet one week, a full orchestra the next week, an electronic band the next week, a solo pianist the next week, a choir the week after, and it would all have to be done, and it would all have to be edited, and it all have to be uploaded to the cloud system at Winchester College so that they could send those recordings to the parents and to the people that performed in those shows. Yeah. And it all happened and it all worked. And I was doing that at the age of 16. So then I learned very quickly that Cubase could be used, for just whatever you want. Literally, I was like, I'm blown away by this potential and what I can do with this software. And I had an infinity sample library. Literally. I literally had the infinite sample library of sample libraries. It was just auto regenerating, and I was fortunate to go to a school where the musicians were insanely talented. 50% of the people who were in my year played an instrument, and of those people, maybe 80% of them played them to a very, very high standard, like grade 8 or plus. And then of those people, a high number of them went on to be in professional orchestras or professional choirs or become music teachers. And so the actual people who were playing these pieces of music and recording it was just, I can't even describe to you how beautiful some of it was. And I just get to sit there in the studio sometimes with my headphones on or listening to it on these beautiful monitors. I'm just like, So I was like, yeah, this really shaped me, mate. Like, honestly, I cannot emphasize enough how much this has shaped my music today. Yeah. And reliving that experience and drawing from that experience is something that I constantly have to remind myself of, and how lucky I was to do that as well.
Yeah. Are you still in contact with like some of those like students, or like not students anymore, but those players when you want to sample or record stuff?
Oh, for sure. It's not difficult to get in touch with those people. A few of them have featured on previous tracks already. And I guess ultimately it's just a question of sending emails these days. But the actual recordings of when I was playing in the concert halls and stuff like that, I've still got those as well. So I can draw on those and sample those occasionally, or just use those as inspiration for chords or whatever. So the link back to my past is still very much alive, and I think that's why I still love writing music and I haven't got bored of it.
Yeah, dude, it's super cool to talk to you about classical music, because it's not a topic that comes up very often on this podcast. It's drum and bass dedicated, and I'd say it's not a passion a lot of people our age still have. I'm kind of curious, what's your perception of the state of classical music today in the world?
So modern classical music is quite strange to me, like contemporary of the moment 2021 classical music. But it's not that far away from what we do as drum and bass producers conceptually. Okay. Sonically, it couldn't be more different. But conceptually, what they're doing is using tools that are well established and finding new ways to express themselves using those tools and to convey emotions to audiences. That's on the baseline. That's all they're doing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how they get there or what medium they use. It's still defined as classical music because it's played on classical instruments.
Yeah.
But that line is getting increasingly blurred. And when I went to Manchester University for a short while, they had an emphasis on combining electro and acoustic music into one space. So having loudspeakers as alongside instrumentalists.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that whole world is exploding right now, especially behind the scenes in pop music, in music that you're hearing on TV, on radio, on films, on Netflix or whatever. All of the composers and all the creators that make the things that you're listening to are drawing on things that have their roots in this classical world, whether they like it or not. There are people that just changed the world forever in the way that they made music. There are composers that I could list that just go on forever, but like it's, how do I say this? I guess people who don't say that they like classical music, I think don't really understand where that music has come from and the circumstances under which that music was created. And I don't think they also see the similarities between where we are and where they were. Take J.S. Bach, for an example. He had a patron who paid him to do work, and he had to, whether he liked it or not, write X, Y, and Z by this date. And if it wasn't good enough, he'd be sacked.
Yeah.
So how different is that from me?
Yeah.
I have a contract with Hostel Records, which tells me what to write and when to submit it, and how many tunes there are going to be on that release, and how I'll get paid for that release. And if I don't, and I breach that contract, I'll get sacked.
Yeah.
The only thing that's changed is that I use a computer instead of a pen and paper, and I don't have to pay 300 people, all with quills and inkwells, to copy out my scores and send it to some instrumentalist in Freiburg.
And have one of those wigs on your head when you're...
That's literally it, bro. That is it.
Yeah.
So if you want to listen to classical music, listen to it with fresh ears. Listen to Ravel, listen to Gesualdo, listen to Debussy, listen to Stravinsky, and start there.
Yeah. That was going to be one of my follow-ups, because like my parents kind of listened to everything when I was still at home, and but a fair bit of classical music as well, and some of it kind of appealed to me because I was playing piano. So like I love Seti, for example. Ooh. I love his stuff, and
he was weird as hell.
Yeah. He used to have like, there was no like, what was it, like no bars, I think, in his pieces.
He also wore the same suit. So he had 5 of the same suit, and he'd wore one on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday, one on Friday. He wouldn't wear a suit on Saturdays, and he'd have a Sunday suit.
What a legend.
And they were all the same color. They were all purple.
He's like the original, like Zuckerberg, like wearing the same t-shirt every day.
I love it.
Yeah. But so I was kind of like, I had some, it kind of resonated with me on that level, but never really fully got into classical music. And I think for me, it was kind of, the percussive element was kind of missing. I guess when I was listening to rock music, you'd have the full-on drums and stuff like that, which I wasn't really getting in classical music. And the whole singing aspect, which you'd get in an opera, but in classical music in general, you might not
Very
get.
different, yeah.
Yeah. So for somebody who maybe wants to like honestly discover classical music or get into it, and just knows like 1 or 2 like the classical like Beethoven tracks, but wants to dig a bit deeper into it, how would you recommend they kind of start? Where should they start? What kind of pieces?
So that's quite a broad question, but I'll try and narrow it down to composers that I like. So Faure or Faure, Faure with a acute accent. Gabriel is his first name. Gabriel.
French.
Yeah, very French. Wrote some beautiful songs. So if you want to listen to like heart-achingly beautiful sung pieces of choral music or cello melodies, listen to that. If you want to listen to orchestral music that just kind of melts your brain and you don't understand what the hell is going on, listen to Stravinsky. If you like percussion, listen to Stravinsky.
Okay.
Igor Stravinsky, that's his name. If you love pads and ambient kind of stuff, listen to Ravel, Ravel, and Debussy, Debussy. Those are both impressionist composers, and their whole thing was mimicking paint and light and energy and elements. My favorite piece of music in existence is La Mer by Debussy, the sea.
Okay, yeah.
And
it's not Clair de Lune. Is that 1, 2? That's a normie answer.
Yeah, that's a normie answer. It's beautiful, mate. Don't get me wrong. I've got it sat on my piano, and I'm learning to play it right now.
Dude, that's one of the first pieces I learned to play on piano. It took me 2 years.
It's so hard.
It's
so hard.
It's like five different pieces within one. Like it goes on forever.
Yeah. But yeah, La Mer is beautiful, and it's in short movements as well, so you can kind of listen to bits of it instead of having to listen to the whole thing. So yeah, you got the percussion, you got the pads, you've got the songs, and bass, I guess. Who's got the bassiest classical music? God, I don't know. Bartok's pretty cool, pretty bassy as well. Maybe Sibelius, he loves his brass, like really like low brass tuba sounds. Yeah. Bass is difficult because the big instruments are quite modern, really. They didn't really exist until like the late 19th, early 20th century, when you get like tubas and like contrabassoons and these kinds of things. Obviously, like if you just want grandeur and to be kind of blown away by what's going on in front of you or in your ears, listen to Wagner, because his stuff is just unbelievably dense and yet very nuanced. And he tries to be the best at everything, Wagner. He's like, I'm going to be the person that makes the best chords, and I'm going to write the best melodies, and I'm going to write the biggest music, and it's going to be the longest as well. And I'm going to spend the best money and the most money making my performance absolutely amazing. And it's going to be so demanding on the singers. They're going to have to literally like swap during performances and have 2 performers.
Oh shit.
It's just like,
he probably had a high
calm down. See, there's so much out there, and I think people get lulled into this kind of bubble of classical music that exists on streaming networks and on classical stuff that's like Classic FM or Radio 3 or whatever. And it's nice to listen to, and it's pleasant, and it gets that endorphin box ticked, but ultimately it doesn't provide you with anything more.
Yeah.
And if you want to be challenged by the music that you listen to, then crack on with the composers that I've just listed.
Yeah.
If you really, really want to do something strange, listen to Gesualdo, who is a choral composer from the Italian Renaissance, who killed his wife and family and buried them in his backyard.
Holy shit.
And essentially invented chromatic harmony before chromatic harmony was a thing. So everyone else was doing like monk-esque singing choral music, and they were writing fugues and doing really like long pieces of music to praise the Lord. And that was the entire thing. And they did like antiphony, but Gesualdo was like, nah, fuck that. I am going to make my chords sound like the devil created them himself. And then I'm going to make people sing that.
Okay, so that's the chromatic harmony you're talking about, like just notes next to each other.
He just did weird stuff. Like people did tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant, tonic, dominant. Like at that time, it was 1500s. And he was like, no, I'm going to go C sharp minor, and then I'm going to go to G minor with an added F sharp in it. And I'm going to,
Stuff that has no place being there, basically.
No, he had no business doing that, but he did it anyway.
And he also killed his wife, so that's also interesting.
Yeah, he went mental. Properly mental.
Yeah. Often these, composers, it's like I often think about this. You mentioned like Kanye West, just in passing by earlier. And like, I've heard interviews of him, and he seems kind of like this kind of fine line between genius and completely insane sometimes. And I do feel like some of these composers or inventors or like Einstein and people like those, and there's like a very fine line between a pure genius and just off your nuts.
I think that is very true, first and foremost. And secondly, I think it's a result of the satisfaction and the energy they get from doing what they're doing. And it's all consuming. Like, take the project I was working on just an hour before we started recording this podcast. And I knew that we were recording at midday, and I set an alarm for 11:20 because I knew I needed 40 minutes to kind of get out of that mindset and actually get into a sociable mindset again. But my alarm went off at 11:20. I started working at, like 9:20 or something like that this morning. My alarm went off like literally, it was like 3 seconds, I swear. I started working at 9:20 and then it was like, oh, it's 11:20. I was like,
Jesus,
what? And then I look back and I actually look what I've done, and I basically finished a new idea. And I'm like, well, what was I doing? Why was that so enjoyable?
Yeah.
And I think if anyone was trying to interrupt me in that moment, they would get that insanity that people kind of, place and project onto people like Einstein. And I think it's just that energy that they're so focused on what they're doing that if you interrupt them and distract them from that, they're going to seem crazed, because they're just in that zone, like shit's happening at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And then you just come in and be like, oh, where's the cat? It's like, do not care.
What is a cat? Yeah, they talk about this in psychology, like state of flow, and it's just that state where you're like everything kind of dissolves around you and you're just in that one thing you're doing. And athletes talk about it when they're doing whatever they're doing, and obviously artists as well. Super interesting. I do want to ask you like maybe a common question, but strings is typically something that's really hard to get right when you're like not a composer and you don't know the theory behind it. And I know when I try to put strings in my tunes, it just sounds like shit most of the time because I have no idea what I'm doing, and just like writing chords as if it was piano, and it's not sounding great. So what kind of tips would you have for people trying to incorporate string arrangements in their tunes?
Cool.
Both from a like arrangement point of view, I guess, but maybe like plugins that you use or libraries, whatever.
First thing is use good source material. If your budget is not really an option, then buy Spitfire stuff. It's the best, and it's really expensive. And if you don't quite have that budget, then look into the Complete Composers Collection, which is sold by, I believe now they've been bought by another company. It's called like Sounds Online or something. But essentially you can pay for a monthly subscription, much like Splice or whatever, and you can have access to most of their sample libraries. And if you pay a bit more, you can get all of their sample libraries, etc. And the samples that they have up on there are very diverse, and they are essentially what I used to build out Life Cycle, my first album. And that's the first step, is finding good source material. If you have good source material, you're halfway there. The next step is keeping it simple. So if you want to add strings to a track, you've got to ask yourself why and whether they actually need to be there. And if they really do, how long do they need to be there for? Do they need to be there for 16 whole bars, or can they just be the end of the phrase? Can it just be a violin going dee, dee, dee?
Just a turnaround, yeah.
Exactly. Or can it just be the first chord and then you can morph into another instrument? Or you could just use the sample libraries to their strengths, which is what they are, is just static elements, really. And then the third thing is, if you get good at that, is kind of what I was talking about earlier with voice leading and writing for the right register. Cellos sound nice when they're really low and bassy, and also sound nice when they're playing really high and strangled, like kind of in the viola violin region. And cellos mimic the human voice the closest in terms of pitch from bottom to top.
Okay.
So it's a good place to start. And if you want to write a solo melody, especially in D&B, a cello is a good place to start with that, because it has the ability to sound nice throughout its full range.
Yeah.
A violin sounds pretty strangled, very high, and very synthetic, and sounds kind of a bit loose and a bit odd when it's like open strings at the bottom, and it's like quite long, open, loose strings on the violin.
Yeah.
They tend to sound best when you're kind of like a third of the way up the fingerboard. So you want to be looking for pitches that are above, kind of like an octave below the lowest note on a violin.
Okay. Yeah.
And then a viola is the glue that holds the violin and the cello together. Okay. So anything that the violin can't do and that the cello can't do, a viola should do.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's what you have to learn when you're writing for strings, is rather than just writing chords and then expecting a full string patch to kind of know what to do, start with a solo violin, a solo viola, and a solo cello, and maybe a solo double bass if you need it.
Yeah.
And write the parts individually.
Yeah.
And if there are notes in common between two chords, glue those two notes together so that the violin doesn't have to lift its bow off the string. So, for example, together? So if you have two chords, one is C minor, you've got C, E flat, and G, and then the next chord is G minor.
Okay, like sustain it basically.
So you just sustain the notes in common between the two chords.
Gotcha.
So that and therefore the bow doesn't have to come off the string and the sample won't restart.
It'll feel more natural and
Exactly. And the same thing goes for when to move strings. When to move from string to string, or when to move. When to stop the sound. That's as crucial as when to start. So you can use the end of the string note to emphasize the chord, or you can just let it die away. So you can have something that's like and goes to nothing.
Yeah.
And then you can bounce that to audio and fade it out so it goes even more to nothing.
Yeah.
Or you could have something that crescendos towards
like an accent.
And then it has an accent at the end, exactly.
Yeah.
And use the strength of the string instruments. So what it's really good for is that it's changing dynamics through a note. Whereas a piano, you play a note and then it vanishes.
Yeah.
Strings are the opposite to that. You want to start things quietly and then get them louder and then get them quieter and then get them louder. And things get much more dynamic. And the final step, level a billion, is trying to avoid string instruments moving at the same time. So if you've got chords happening, or repeated chords, so you've got like C minor, G minor, G minor, instead of the two, so you've got cello and violin playing those two notes, instead of them starting the notes at the same time, just stagger them so they're starting at different times, and then they'll get to a different part of their stroke at a different time, and then you'll have a more evolving and less unified texture. And then you could apply that to melodies, you can apply that to chords, you can apply that to arrangements, and you're away. But essentially it's just start with good source material, just keep it simple, and stop things moving at the same time.
Sounds like a lot of work. Or I could go on Splice and find a good arrangement and just slap it in.
You could do that.
I'm just
you could
messing.
do that. Or you could do that and then rebuild it from scratch and change the key. So, for example, find a splice sample that you like and be like, okay, I'm going to double all the note values in this sample. So if it's a crotchet or a quarter note, I'm going to make it a half note or a whatever, a minim. And then I'm going to change the key and use it as an exercise to teach you what's going on and teach you actually how the string arrangement is put together. And then you'll see it in MIDI form in front of you, and you'll be like, oh, if I just change this note and then I change this note, I can match it to my chord sequence, and it sounds really nice.
Yeah, but I definitely agree.
So rather than just using a sample, it's like learn from them.
Yeah. Well, what you said about not moving in step and changing, I often think back when I'm doing strings to, again, very normie track, but Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. And I think it's four instruments, I think, 4-piece arrangement.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when you listen to it, it's like 4 different tracks playing different, like almost 4 different stories playing different things. And it's just like when you put them together, it creates this whole new story instead of just having like...
Yeah, so... There's another really good example of exactly that. So Eleanor Rigby is a fantastic example of each part having its own role.
Yeah.
And it was recorded incredibly well.
Yeah.
It's like, when you listen to Eleanor Rigby, you're like, oh my God, I can hear the viola. Oh, there's the cello. And then the violin goes like...
Fucking love that track.
It's so good. But then there's a Ravel string quartet. And there's a movement in that string quartet called Assez Vif, ASSEZ, and then VIF. So quite quickly is what French translation is. And it's the starts plucked, like every instrument is plucked. It's like it just goes on one. That each instrument is doing its own thing, and then all of a sudden they come together. Yeah. And you're like, it's just like a magic moment. They're all going off and doing their own things, and it's exactly like Eleanor Rigby. And then they come into the chorus, and they all play the same rhythm, and it's just like, wow.
Everything.
Yeah, exactly. So you can really make the most of that in your tunes. You can make things do different stuff, and then bring them together and make them do the same thing, and everyone's like, woo.
Yeah.
Dude. So I could talk about music for ages.
Yeah, I can hear that, especially classical music. But it's great because it's a topic I haven't really covered on this podcast before. So wanted to make sure I spent enough time with you chatting about it, and I think we got some great insights and some great tips for people. So just gonna quickly wrap it off. Really enjoyed this one. Thanks a lot for your time, man. I know you're busy as always with your music, so really enjoyed this one. Maybe before we shut off, let people know what you have going on in your life at the moment, any projects you want to disclose, where can people check you out, all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, mate. It's been great to just, spiel about music, and hopefully someone out there will be inspired by my spiel. But at the same time, people might just be like, actually, he is making some sense. So maybe I'll go listen to some Gesualdo.
Yeah.
If you want to check me out, you can follow me on all the social medias. I've now managed to get them all at Keeno DNB. So everything is / Keeno DNB. I have a website, KeenoDNB.com. And you can find out... you can find my latest album there. You can subscribe to a mailing list. You can find out about my Bristol Mix Sessions podcast. You can find about events, and you can also do a contact form there, so you can email me if you have any questions or if you have any music you want to send me. I have another website called bristolmixsessions.com, and every month where we're doing events in Bristol at the moment, we're doing monthly events at Basement 45, which is a 250 cap small venue, and it's very sweaty and very fun. And we've sold out 2 of our 3 shows so far. We've done 5 seated events during the COVID pandemic that all sold out as well. And it's really enjoyable, actually. It's stressful, but enjoyable. And if you go to bristolmixsessions.com, the latest show will be there. So it will redirect you to the tickets for the latest show. And we're going to be planning 5 years of Bristol Mix Sessions next year.
5 years already.
So Jesus. We're hoping to do a couple in Bristol, maybe one in London, probably one in Manchester, actually, if we can squeeze one in there. And we're going to look to do a couple abroad as well. But that will all depend on visas and expenses. And finally, if you would like to watch any of my DJ sets, or if you would like to listen to any of my music, you can find me on Spotify. You can find me on YouTube Music, Amazon Music, Deezer, all the usual places. And you can find my latest DJ sets on my YouTube channel, which is also /Keeno D&B.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, best of luck with all the events. I know that's like a huge endeavor to actually put on events, and like a completely different skill set to actually writing music. So best of luck with those. And
my partner Liv is absolutely smashing it. So it's taken a lot of the weight off my shoulders.
Big up to her.
Yeah, massively.
But in the meantime, really enjoy this chat, and I know people will love this one. So thanks a lot again for coming on, and all the best, man.
Nice one, mate.
Cheers.
Take care of yourself. Big ups.